Recording now. Let's debrief this problem. In the other blocks, I think a lot of the issues were related to not understanding the question, which is very common, or like not reading all of the words in the question. I'm going to do this the same way that I did the warm-up. Like I'm going to kind of think my way through it as if I'm feeling it out for the first time. So I know I'm trying to find an average, but there are these other wrinkles where like maybe sometimes the numbers are negative and we should ignore them. And then there's this weird thing with the negative 999. I'm going to start by just ignoring all of that. I'm just going to remember, how did I do the average? So I'm going to have a sum, just like the warm-up. And then I'm going to loop over all the data, only this time it's called data. And I'm going to add each item from the data into sum. And then at the end, whoa, the formatting is like a little weird, isn't it? Okay. So then at the end, I can return, I got this, sum divided by data.length. Okay, so this is going to work just as a regular old average. So now let's try and get those other conditions in there. And this is a great way of approaching problems if you're not sure how to satisfy a bunch of different conditions at once, is start with a basic framework and then insert things that you've decided to ignore initially. Okay, so the first constraint is sometimes the sensor gives negative rainfall values. It doesn't make sense to have like negative 3 centimeters of rain, so you're supposed to ignore those. So how am I going to ignore it? It's like I only want to add it into sum if it's a number that makes sense for rain. So if data I is bigger than or equal to 0, because it's, and like double check your own. It's not an error to say that there's no rain. You know, that's just like normal in California mostly, except for the first day of school. So, you know, so if there's a valid amount of rain, we'll add it in. And now I'm realizing this is maybe not going to work anymore because, like, let's say there's like 100 measurements in my array, but only 5 of them, like the sensor actually worked. At the end, I'd want to divide the sum by 5, because that's the total number of things I added up. I wouldn't want to include all of the things that I skipped. So now I really will have a counter, and I'll increment the counter every time I add something. And then instead of dividing by data.length, I'll divide by the counter. Okay, so we're getting further here. The last constraint is if we get to a negative 999, that's the end. Like we just want to stop looping at that point. So I'll just test directly for that. If data element I is negative 999, I had a lot of people doing break, which is okay. You might not know about break, and that's also okay. I don't think they told you that last year. What break does is it will take you outside of the for loop. So it'll break out of the for loop. So here we're saying if we've seen the negative 999, break out of the for loop, and we can return. A different thing you could do instead of break is this. You could say, if we see the negative 999, we know we're done, so let's just exit right away, and what we're going to return is the average that we've collected up to that point. So that would also work. So rather than have a for loop and then test to see, did we reach this special value where we want to stop, instead of that, we could use a while loop. We could have an int I out here, whoops, and then we could say while data I doesn't equal negative 999. So as long as we're not currently looking at the end value, let's go ahead and add the data in and then divide by how many. And this is almost going to work, except I've got the same problem that I had in the warm-up. I have to increment I. And now I have a problem which is if there is no negative 999, and I don't know if the problem implied that there had to be one or not, but if there isn't a negative 999, I'm just going to keep going until I hit the end of the array, and then I'm going to keep going past that. So I'm going to go out of bounds. So I think a really complete solution would look like this. As long as I is less than data.length, and data I isn't equal to negative 999. So that would be like a really nice while loop version of the solution.